On the broadcast this Wednesday night, President Park Geun-hye and Korea's finance ministry will place the utmost priority on economic recovery in 2016. We have the details. Korea's National Assembly Speaker will not table pending economy-related bills to a plenary session despite requests from the top office. And a Canadian pastor is sentenced to life in North Korea. The South Korean-born religious leader faces a lifetime of hard labor charged with crimes against the state. News Center begins right now. Good evening to our viewers in Korea and hello to those around the world. Welcome to News Center. A critical turning point in deciding next year's growth and beyond. President Park Geun-hye has called for reforms and an expedited approval of reform-related bills to better insulate the Korean economy for the looming uncertainties in the coming year. Now, this during a meeting on next year's economic policy directions today. Our presidential office correspondent Song Ji-sun joins me from the top office. Ji-sun, so President Park has called for what she called a contingency plan.
Kanyang, next year's growth outlook has been cut to 3.1% from the initial outlook of 3.3%, reflecting economic uncertainties. President Park stresses reform is the key to support balanced growth in such difficult times. President Park Geun-hye stresses reform is the key to support balanced growth in such difficult times. Meeting with ministers about next year's economic policy, President Park stressed the economy must be put back on track so the people can feel its recovery in 2016. She added that the Korean economy fared relatively well despite obstacles in and out of Korea, but said there are even more uncertainty to be tackled next year, like the potential U.S. Fed rate hike, which would add even more variables into international financial markets. She again called on lawmakers to proceed with reform bills to boost the economy, saying they're looking away from outstanding issues.
국민이 간절히 바라는 일을 제쳐두고 무슨 정치 개혁을 한다고 할 수가 있겠습니까? 국민이 바라는 이 일들을 하는 것이 정치 개혁의 출발점이라고 생각합니다. 부디 올해가 가기 전에 일자리를 갈망하는 청년들의 요구를 저버리지 않기를 바랍니다.
The presidential office has already called on the National Assembly multiple times to expedite passing those bills aimed at reviving the economy, but lawmakers seem to be more interested in dealing with a bill for next year's general election, with the National Assembly Speaker officially declined to call on Wednesday. Park said our youth is taking the toll for the delay, saying that thousands of new jobs would have been created, for example, only if the bills on facilitating the service sector had taken effect.
일하고 싶어하는 이 젊은이들의 잃어버린 시간, 잃어버린 인생을 누가 보상할 수 있겠습니까? 우리 미래 세대에게 더 이상 죄 짓지 말고 지금이라도 실행을 해야 합니다.
She reiterated that now is a critical time for the Korean economy in determining whether it can take another leap forward or slump into slowing growth, and growth can only be fully supported with reforms. Kanyang.
Definitely a critical juncture for this country, especially as global uncertainties loom over the economy in the new year. Thank you, Ji-sun. Arirang News, Song Ji-sun from Korea's presidential office of Cheongwadae. Now, the Speaker of the National Assembly will not use his authority to table a set of economy and terrorism-related bills, but a different story for the plan on redrawing electoral districts ahead of April's general elections. Speaker Chung spoke to reporters in Parliament earlier today. Our parliamentary correspondent Ji Myung-gil joins me with the specifics. Myung-gil, the Speaker left the possibility open for using his special authority to put to vote a bill, but not those requested by the presidential office.
Good evening, Kanyang. National Assembly Speaker Chung Ih-hwa showed his determination on Wednesday to yield his authority, forcing the direct referral of a bill to resolve the current gridlock over readjusting electoral boundaries. Let's hear what he had to say.
It's a serious matter that rival parties have failed to reach a conclusion over the redrawing of constituency boundaries. Before or right after December 31st, I will have to take action as the electoral matter will be regarded as a state of legislative emergency.
Chung said the current situation could harm next year's general election because the current district system will be invalid from January 1st. This will be an unprecedented scenario in the lead-up to April's general election. If the parliament does not approve a new electoral map by the end of December, candidates would technically be campaigning in constituencies that may be scrapped or rendered invalid next year. Concerning the presidential office's pressure to vote on economy-related bills and the counterterrorism bill, Chung said he remains wary of forcefully exercising his authority.
According to Clause 85 of the National Assembly Act, the Speaker can put a bill to a vote in the event of a natural disaster or a state emergency. Considering the current economic situation, I cannot refer the economy-related bills to a vote at a plenary session.
The presidential office of Cheongwade has been pressuring the assembly to pass bills they say will help Korea's sagging economy and prevent terrorism threats. During his press conference, Chung Ih-hwa stressed that these particular bills need bipartisan consensus before they clear the National Assembly. Kon-young?
Well, it looks like the hours and days left this year may fall too short of time needed for the legislators to get all their businesses done before the year's out. Thanks, Myung-gil. Our Ji Myung-gil reporting from the National Assembly. Economic Directive 2016 for details on what this country plans to do in the coming year on how to best run the economy. The specifics disclosed during today's economic policy meeting. Policy ministers meeting, that is. Arirang's economics correspondent Hwang Ji-hye is in the studio with me. Now, Ji, let's face it, the economy has a tough year ahead with challenges both stemming from the domestic as well as global front. But the government seems pretty confident about the economy next year, as clearly reflected by the growth forecast it gave.
Right. Korea expects its economy to expand 3.1% in 2016, and that's a trim from an earlier forecast of 3.3%, but still higher than a majority of private financial institutions have put forward. And to reach that rather optimistic target, the economic management plan for next year focuses on pushing through structural changes to maintain the recovery momentum this year that came on the back of expansionary fiscal and monetary policies.
So what kind of policies is the government endorsing or implementing to push forward with this economic growth?
The government will put emphasis on easing regulations to boost investment and come up with new growth engines. It will designate regulation-free areas in 14 different regions across the country with the goal of fostering industries like biohealth, eco-friendly vehicles, and cosmetics. This project follows the state-driven program this year to build 17 creative economy innovation centers around the nation. An expert I spoke to today says such measures comes as the country faces sluggish global demand, especially from China.
Since it looks like it's going to be difficult to see immediate improvements on the export front, the government is turning its focus to domestic consumption, and in order to do that, it needs to see more investment.
Now, also on the agenda for next year is completing structural reforms in the labor, education, finance, and public sectors, but some experts are skeptical as to whether the government will be able to push through such reforms with Parliament still deadlocked over pending labor bills.
Korea has general elections next year and the presidential election the year after. With political events like these, the government will face major opposition in completing the reforms, and they may lose steam.
Another focal point in the government's this new list of measures is that the country's economic growth will be assessed based on current prices as well.
Right, that's right. And the government will now offer, as you said, not only the real GDP growth rate, but nominal growth figures as well. A move reflecting the government's drive to keep better tabs on deflationary concerns. It also comes as the government aims to realize growth that can actually be felt by the public.
The nominal growth rate has to remain at appropriate levels so that corporate sales and household income can rise. That will in turn raise government tax revenue. With the Bank of Korea, we will do our best to reach the 3% range of real GDP growth and nominal growth around the 5% range.
At current prices, the government expects to see 4.5% growth next year. Korea's consumer price growth has remained in the 0% range since November last year and edged up 1% last month from a year earlier.
There are also some concerned voices that say, with this takes Korea's monetary policy in the direction of carrying out or further boosting this recovery momentum rather than focusing or managing risks the economy faces.
Yes, the government, in fact, did pledge this time to tackle the household and corporate debt issue, allowing troubled firms to begin corporate workout programs before their deteriorating financial health becomes irreparable. But snowballing household debt already exceeds $1 trillion, and especially in the face of a widely expected rate hike by the U.S. Federal Reserve, the threat posed by the problems is getting more and more serious.
Right, definitely something that will be closely watched and monitored in the next few months. All right, Ji-hye, thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
The nation's central bank has set fresh inflation targets for the next 3 years, noticeably lower than the previous target band. The new target comes after criticism that former goals have simply not been attainable. The Bank of Korea's announcement was made at the same time the finance ministry said it would start presenting nominal or unadjusted for inflation GDP as a regular indicator in the government's drive for growth. Shin Se-min reports.
The Bank of Korea lowered its annual inflation target to 2% starting 2016, scrapping its current policy of using a target band for consumer prices. The new inflation goal is down from the existing target range of 2.5% to 3.5%, set to expire as of this year. The target is considered the optimal rate of inflation for the economy, described by the BOK as being the most desirable level of price growth for stable economic expansion. Citing weaker inflationary pressure, the central bank attributed the trimmed target to the country's aging population, heightened price competition in exports, and weakening growth potential influenced by a prolonged fall in crude oil costs. All things considered, the BOK said it expects consumer prices to pick up an average 1.7% next year.
Lowering the target to 2% is a sign Korea is following the lead taken by developed countries like Canada and the UK, and shows its determination to achieve stable economic growth down the line.
Under the current target band set back in late 2012, the central bank had missed projections for consumer price growth every month for more than 2.5 years, sparking criticism and pushing it to put forward more attainable goals and assume responsibility. Starting next year, if the actual inflation rate deviates from the targeted 2% by more than 0.5 percentage points for 6 consecutive months, the top central banker will be required to hold a news conference to explain why. With the lower inflation rate, the central bank also brought Korea's potential growth rate down a notch, projecting it'll stand between 3 to 3.2% leading up to 2018. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
It's the day investors have been waiting for as the U.S. Federal Reserve poises to raise short-term borrowing costs and usher in the end of an era of near-zero interest rates. Well, the rate hike expected to be announced in the next 6 hours if and when it happens, will be the first since June 2006. Now, that's before the Apple rolled out the original iPhone. Yep, that's how long it's been. So it goes without saying that the hike comes with many uncertainties, spelling concerns for emerging economies, including Korea. Our Kim Min-ji explains.
It's widely expected the U.S. Federal Reserve will raise rates this week for the first time in nearly a decade. According to a recent Wall Street Journal poll of 65 economists, 97% said the Fed will probably raise rates from near zero. Adding more certainty to the data-dependent decision, the U.S. Consumer Price Index edged up 0.5% on-year in November, slightly above market expectations. The country has also posted improved job market data, adding 211,000 jobs in November. The jobless rate also fell to a more than 7-year low of 5% last month. Ahead of the Fed's announcement, European stocks extended gains on Wednesday. In the UK, the FTSE 100 added 0.84% as of 9:30 p.m. Korea time, while Germany's DAX 30 rose 0.87%. Asian stocks also rallied, with Korea's benchmark Kospi closing up 1.88%, Japan's Nikkei rising 2.61%, and Hong Kong's Hang Seng adding 2.01%. This follows overnight gains on Wall Street as energy and financial shares rebounded on a pickup in oil prices. The Dow Jones Industrial Average added 0.9%, the S&P 500 1.06%, and the Nasdaq rose 0.87%.
Well, I think the liftoff is actually helping propel stocks higher. We've been waiting for this moment, it feels like, for a year plus, and it's finally here, and the economy can sustain higher rates.
But a rate hike may not be welcome news in general for emerging economies, including Korea.
Due to a contraction in emerging economies, it can pose a negative threat to the Korean economy as it raises the chances of capital outflow.
The Institute of International Finance says more than $33 billion flowed out of emerging markets in the third quarter alone, $10 billion of which left Korea's shores. Analysts say a rate hike may do more harm than good, as further capital outflows coupled with slowing growth in China and uncertainty in emerging markets could spark a financial crisis. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
North Korea has sentenced a Canadian pastor to hard labor for life, the latest punishment the isolated state has inflicted on outside missionaries who have been vilified as spies or agents of subversive ideas. The South Korean-born religious leader was detained by North Korean authorities back in February while on an aid mission to North Korea's northeastern city of Raejin. For the latest, here's Arirang News' Lee Soo-eun.
A North Korean court has sentenced Canadian pastor Im Hyun-soo, who had emigrated from South Korea, to a lifetime of labor for crimes against the state. China's official news agency Xinhua reported on Wednesday that North Korea's Supreme Court held that for the past 18 years, Im attempted to overthrow the North Korean regime and undermine its social system through religious activities. The court reportedly accused the pastor of joining a U.S. and South Korean-led human rights racket against the country by circulating anti-North Korean propaganda. Last July, Im had given a press conference in Pyongyang admitting the subversion charges. But the admittance seems unreliable, as others who have previously been detained in North Korea have said that they were forced to make false confessions. Also, the pastor's family, in a statement released soon after the confession was aired, said that since 1997, Im had only made humanitarian aid trips to North Korea. Canadian authorities have yet to make an official statement regarding the ruling. Ottawa cut ties with Pyongyang in 2010 and now has limited diplomatic influence in North Korea. Head of one of Canada's largest churches, Im was held by the North in February when undertaking one of his more than 100 aid trips to the communist state. Lee Soo-eun, Arirang News.
What's cooking? Well, apparently not something many Koreans do these days. More Koreans are dining out or buying their food rather than grocery shopping for ingredients and making that fine home-cooked meal. Latest report shows that the average Korean household spends nearly half of their monthly food bills on restaurants, delivery foods, or takeouts. Why are more Koreans heading out instead of putting on the apron? Our Oh Soo-young may have some answers.
There's nothing like a home-cooked meal, but making one can turn out to be quite a chore. These days, more and more Koreans are choosing to dine out instead of getting out their pots and pans.
I live alone, so eating out saves time and is simpler and cheaper than buying and preparing all the ingredients.
I eat out almost every day because there's much more variety. I regularly order food too.
I go to restaurants about 4 to 5 times a week. It's more convenient than cooking. Plus, I have a lot of social gatherings, so I eat out more often than not.
A report from the Agriculture Ministry shows that the average Korean household spends roughly $425 on food each month. About a third of their monthly food bills is spent on eating out at restaurants. Combined with the amount spent on food delivery or eating on the go, that's 42% of the bill. For single-person households, the amount rose to 55.1%.
Also, consumers are increasingly purchasing pre-cooked meals, ranging from traditional Korean dishes such as spicy tofu stew to simpler Western-style foods.
The ministry's report shows that the number of those who bought ready-to-eat meals has risen steadily in the past 3 years, and it's a trend that's likely to continue.
For those who live and eat alone, instances of dining out or taking out food as well as buying ready meals is continuously increasing. There are currently 5 million single households in the country, or about 20% of the entire population, and this number has been growing every year.
With Korean households putting away their aprons and picking up a menu, analysts predict that simpler dining options will continue to expand. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
A special part founding of its ruling workers.
Camera filming me, although following the new
Final at a cabinet
event. Same title. I bring the 1 week resistance from the visitors to Island.
Republican presidential candidates held their final debate of the year. And not to anyone's surprise, national security took center stage. Bruce Harrison joins me live in the studio. Bruce, it seems many tuned into the debate for the drama, but even as Las Vegas as the backdrop, this one was much more tame.
That's right, Kanyang. Candidates mainly tried to lay out their plans for foreign policy and how they're going to keep Americans safe among a growing number of terrorist attacks at home and around the world. Leading candidate billionaire Donald Trump and Jeb Bush traded jabs for a bit, but I'm sure viewers expected many more low blows coming from or being directed at Trump.
Well, no question he's stolen spotlight so far this campaign. What was it like at Tuesday's debate?
You know, Trump played it safe for the most part and tried to stay above the fray like most of the candidates. But some did take aim after the debate, not at Trump, though, but at the media for the billionaire's campaign success. There have been a handful of reports lately criticizing the press for excessive coverage of Trump's edgy remarks while paying little attention to the issues.
And I know all of you think you're journalists, but you're run by a business, and the business is there to make money, and Donald Trump makes you all money. So that's why you're talking about it.
Criticism aside, candidates may now shift their focus to the economy as U.S. lawmakers just agreed on a budget deal to lift a 40-year embargo on American oil exports. It's a win for Republicans, although they had to bend on green initiatives to get needed support from Democrats. Los Angeles will reopen public schools Wednesday after an apparent hoax sent hundreds of thousands of students home. The district closed 1,000 schools Tuesday after an email threatened an attack with bombs and assault rifles. City leaders are now being criticized for overreacting. Federal officials agreed with the chief of police in New York that the assessment of the threat in L.A. was an overreaction. L.A. Mayor Eric Garcetti conceded the threat was not credible, but cautioned against how to describe it.
Some have used words that I think are probably inappropriate, like hoax and other things, whether it's criminal mischief, whether it's somebody testing vulnerabilities of multiple cities. We still do not know.
The threat was made nearly 2 weeks after a couple inspired by Islamic State killed 14 people and wounded about 20 others an hour's drive away in San Bernardino, California.
Well, across the Pacific, Japan's highest court has upheld a law that married couples must have same surnames. Now, how did the ruling come about?
Sure, Kanyang. Well, a few years ago, a group of plaintiffs challenged this 19th century law, saying it's unconstitutional and violates human rights. Japan's Supreme Court rejected that argument today. Some citizens say they wouldn't feel married without sharing a surname. Now, others agreed, but said the law shouldn't be forced on anyone. But for some, it's not an issue of marriage, it's an issue of who they are.
My identity was Chusamoto Gyoko. What happens to a person who loses that identity? I can't live as Chusamoto Gyoko, and now I won't be able to die as Chusamoto Gyoko.
The law doesn't specify which partner's name is used, but 96% of married women have taken their husband's last name.
And Bruce, that makes Japan the only country out of the group of 7 to have such a law.
That's correct. You know, it's just not an issue in the United States or Great Britain. And to note, though, this was a pair of laws actually being debated at Japan's Supreme Court. The other law actually is kind of a minor victory for human rights in the country. Women are now allowed to, there was a ban on divorcees. They couldn't remarry until 6 months after being divorced, and that has been changed now.
Right. So obviously, the first one is a setback for women's rights in Japan, but in a minor victory, like you said, a second legal provision banning, I guess, women from remarrying within 6 months of a divorce, that has been ruled unconstitutional. Why was such a rule put in place in the first place?
I'm no expert, Kanyang. It dates back to the 19th century, and this was before DNA testing. So apparently it was to avoid confusion about who the father of a child was. So if you were banned from remarrying after 6 months, there was less confusion as to when conception took place and to when the baby would be born. It was kind of an odd timeline, but that's the way it worked back then.
Right, and now that period has been shortened to 100 days, so a woman cannot remarry within 100 days after a divorce.
They're keeping a slight provision in place, yeah, 100 days until you can remarry now.
Very interesting. Interesting laws in various different countries.
Exactly.
All right, Bruce, thank you so much for that.
My pleasure.
Well, we've had our share of warm autumn-like weather, but today it felt like winter was back. Let's see what the weather is shaping up to be like tomorrow with our Jihan. Jihan, I'm hearing that there was even snowfall in Seoul today.
It was a very light snow flurries. I'm sure many of Seoulites couldn't even tell that it was snow. Actually, it was quite bright, and I hope you weren't fooled by those sunshine. But talking about today's temperatures, it was very cold today, especially after those unseasonably warm days we had, as Kon-young just said. But it is in times like this that we need to take extra precautions regarding our health, as a drop 1 degree Celsius in our body can lead immune function to drop by 30%. So keep that in mind tomorrow when heading out, since this cold snap will hit its peak tomorrow morning with a low plunging to -6. Now, that's about 4 degrees lower than today, so be sure to dress extra warmly before heading out. And while it was a bright day here in Seoul, heavy snow fell in some of the southern regions, with more snow to fall overnight, up to 20 centimeters in some of the mountainous regions in Jeju Island. But regions in the Jeollado provinces and Jeju Island will be blanketed with heavy snow until tomorrow, with a heavy snow advisory in place for regions colored in pink. So if you're in these areas, be sure to have snowproof accessories before heading out. But as for here in the capital, it's going to be another bright day. On that note, let's move on to tomorrow's temperatures, checking on the lows first. So here in the capital, we'll start out the day at -6, -4 Daejeon and Daegu will kick out the day at -3, while Busan even Busan will start the day at -1, and it's going to remain cold throughout the day. A lower single digit expected for many parts. 1 for here in the capital, 2 for Daejeon. Daegu will only see a high of 3, and Busan and Jeju Island will only peak at 6 and 5 respectively. Now temperatures will gradually increase over the weekend, but Friday will still see the low remaining at -6, so be sure to stay bundled. Well, that's Korea for you, and here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
Well, indoor climbing that is. Another news out is that there is a travel advisory out for the central and southern regions of the Philippines because of a high terror alert. That is according to the Philippines state media there. And the Seoul government has already put out a travel advisory for the island of Boracay in the Philippines. And for the other areas, there is either a travel ban or travel warning. So make sure you take that into account before you make your end of the year travel plans. That is our broadcast on this Wednesday night. I'm Moon Gun-young. Thank you everyone for watching, and we hope to see you right back here same time tomorrow on NewsCenter.